Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Happy May Day, my friends. Welcome to Modern Leadership, where every week we sit down with authors, experts, and entrepreneurs to see what makes them tick, talk, and totally rock. How cheesy was that? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to shake it up a little bit this morning. I am super excited for our conversation today. You all know I have two daughters, and they are awesome. Of course, I think they are perfect. Welcome to the bias zone, and I want them to have every opportunity out there. They both have so much potential, and frankly, I believe they can do anything. I believe it so strongly that when I had the opportunity to sit down with today's guest, I jumped at the chance. So let me introduce Anni Keffer. Anni is a nationally recognized educator, speaker, author, and entrepreneur. She is the founder of the Young Women of Excellence Conference. How cool is that? She is co-author of Girls Lead. Extraordinary girls share how they can stand up, step out, and lead in all areas of life. She has been featured on CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, and her newest book is Leadership Built on Why, a guide for young adults. Anni, it's so great to have you with us. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jake. I'm so happy to be here. This is going to be an awesome conversation.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. But before we have any of that fun, what did we miss in that intro and that bio?
I think you covered it all. I'm just passionate about helping women and millennials and really anybody who's looking to be a leader to step into what that looks like in their everyday life and live out a passionate, legacy-minded life that changes people's worlds.
Well, and you know I'm biased a little bit. I have two daughters, and I want them to have everything. And so I love this concept, this topic, but we're not going to focus just specifically on young women. We're going to focus on millennials and all of us. A lot of the leadership principles can translate across genders and ages and all those things. So if you're not a young lady, don't tune out. We're going to have a little bit of fun today. But Anni, why don't you tell us a little bit about this new book that you wrote, Leadership Built on Why?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really started back around the age of 4. So my parents did a great job about teaching me two things. One, what leadership was. So really the theory behind leadership and what it was and the definition of it. And then two, what it looked like in everyday life, in your business, in your community, in your marriage, with your family. And so I really understood that there was a marriage between the two and that you couldn't have one without the other. You had to have knowledge and you had to have action. So I grew up with this great mindset, but the problem became that I bought into a lot of the myths and the lies that we are told about leadership. Like you have to be a certain age or have a certain title or a certain job, maybe have a college education. So I started to really play small and shrink back into the idea that, hey, maybe I can't really do this now, or maybe I wasn't really made to do this at all. You know, maybe I just was meant to have a nice 9 to 5 and go home and just sort of exist in the world. So I bought into those myths and the lies. And then I became older and I started to realize, hey, wait a second. I was looking at my generation and the generation behind me and just seeing that there was a desperate need for a true understanding of what leadership was and then living it out in our everyday lives. So, Jake, I sort of felt like I was looking at Mount Everest. I was at the base of Mount Everest looking at it and going, okay, I have to move this left. Is this even possible? Can I do it? It's absolutely terrifying, but I knew that I couldn't turn away. I couldn't have a blind eye to the problem in our world. So I started on this journey of learning about more of what leadership was, living it out first in my everyday life before I was going to teach other people how to do it. And then I wanted to write the book. I wanted to give people a resource to be able to sort of skip some of the mistakes that I had made and really start to live that leadership journey now instead of waiting for it.
Well, you talk about starting at age 4. Your parents really wanted to instill in you this opportunity for leadership. And I want to take you back to that time because 4 is such a young age. It's, you know, you might not understand a whole lot of what's going on. What did your parents do to kind of instill some of those leadership traits within you at such a young age?
Yeah, so I really had no idea even how to spell leadership, right? It was, this weird kind of concept of, okay, like I get my parents are saying it, but, I didn't know much about it. So again, they started to have these conversations. And I think that's something that's really important. If any parents are listening and they're trying to think about how to help their kids be leaders and how to instill that in them, one of the big things they can do is just having dialogue and conversation with their kids about maybe the problems that they're facing, how they're choosing to be a leader, what that even means. Because again, so often that we think leadership is one certain thing, that it's a title or it's a position or it's something that somebody gives me permission to do, when really we give ourselves the permission to be leaders and live that out. So they were telling me all that great information. And then they were showing me, I was seeing them being leaders in the jobs that they have, in the business that my dad owned, in the marriage that they had, in our church, in our family. So anytime a situation would come up, especially as I got older, my dad and my mom would take the time to sit down and talk about, well, hey, like, how can you step up and be a leader? Or, hey, how could you have done that a little bit better? So it started a dialogue and a conversation for me to begin to start to understand what that looked like more.
And so when we look at leadership and we start to talk about this conversation that you were having at such a young age, and I completely agree with you. As parents, we've got to tell and we've got to model it. And we build it step by step, right? We start small and we kind of ingrain it into our kids as they're growing up. But one of the things you talked about leadership permission. And you said that oftentimes we feel like leadership is permission that people give to us. We feel like we want to understand leadership as something that somebody else bestows upon us or gives to us, but that really it's something we need to do ourselves. And I want to dive into that a little bit. So what does it mean to give yourself permission to be a leader? And then I want to dive even down further and say, okay, if we believe what you're saying, Annie, how do we do it?
Yeah. So it really starts with the idea of self-belief. So a lot of times you'll hear the concept, you can't love others until you love yourself.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the same thing for leaders, right? You can't be a leader for others until you're a leader for yourself and in your own life. And two, what goes along with that is, you are not able to talk about leadership or to help others with leadership until you're the one kind of stepping out and going that opposite direction than the masses. You're kind of swimming upstream and doing it first to give other people permission to do the same. But until you believe that, and again, it's not, I'm sure you've seen this in your own life and with your daughters, it's never an overnight success. It's never an overnight, one day you believe one thing and the next day, oh my gosh, I'm changed and I believe, and I live it out, every single day. So it's a process. It's, first understanding, okay, like I was made to do this. I was made to be a leader. I'm not going to feel like a leader every day. People are going to come at me. People are going to criticize me. They're going to tell me that you're too young. You don't know enough. All this kind of, negative things at us. I'm just going to choose to ignore it and realize that that's not the truth. So it has to kind of start in our own life to start pursuing, what we were called to do, even at a young age. That sounds kind of funny. People are like, how do you know what you're called to do? Maybe at age 8 or 17 or whatever. But it's just starting to understand maybe how you are wired, how you're made, what you're passionate about, what you want to change in the world. So starting on that own journey first and really believing that you were made to do that helps us then give other people permission to do the same. My dad would always tell me when I was younger, some people are watching you, but there's other people maybe in the shadows that are paying attention, that are watching your life, seeing how you make decisions that you may never know are watching you. So to always understand that how I choose to live my life, how I choose to be a leader, how I choose to work through failure and, persevere through the hard times are showing other people that they can do the same. That it may be hard and scary, but you're giving other people the permission and the confidence to say, okay, if she can do it, if he can do it, I think I can do this too.
And I couldn't agree with you more as far as people observing us. There are people constantly keeping their eye on us to see how we react, how we act in a certain situation, how we step up to the leadership plate, or if we shrink from it and back away. I wanted to ask you, though, how we do this, especially in the teenage years. So I have a daughter that's entering the teenage years, and this is a tough time to be a leader because it's almost like if you've ever played that game Whack-A-Mole and, the mole pops up and then we hit it with the mallet. Almost when you're a teenager, It seems like you're playing a game of Whack-A-Mole with leadership. You pop your head up to be a leader and your peers, those around you in school are going to, knock you on the head and knock you back down. So how do we lead in an environment and a culture where everybody's kind of knocking us down? And by the way, this isn't just in high school, right? As you start to climb the corporate ladder, as you start to be successful in business and work, there's constantly going to be people who are jealous that look at you and say, I'm going to knock this guy down because I don't feel good about myself. So how do we deal with that in that environment?
Yeah, it's the reminder that, a dog never barks at a parked car. So as soon as that car moves, man, that dog is going to run after it and bark at it. So I think it's the mindset and the reminder that when you start to do something good, when you start to follow after what you were called to do, what you were made to do, people are going to be negative. And like you said, it's out of a fear and a jealousy. A lot of times people inherently know, hey, I was made to do something more, but that's scary. It's easy to get comfortable. It's easy to just fall into a routine, to do what, society tells us we need to do, to kind of sit pretty in our nice little white labeled boxes. And when other people are doing the opposite, really following hard after what they are passionate about, it's scary for us who are not doing that, right? And so even though we've given those other people permission, they may not always take that permission. So it's really a mindset of, okay, it's gonna hurt and it's gonna be hard to deal with the criticism. And I think we have to have a thick skin, but at the same time, we're human, right? So it's the mindset of, as soon as I start moving, people are going to criticize, but also, that's coming from a place of fear and jealousy, so be sympathetic to that. And also, understanding that it's okay that it's going to hurt. It's okay that, the negative stuff doesn't feel good, but, you can't let it sink your ship. You can't let it, go internally and stop you from doing what you're called to do. So I think when you start with that mindset, especially as a teenager, because, what do we want to always be? We want to be known. We want to be loved. We want to be accepted. So when that's, everything coming at us that's the opposite of that, it can be very hard to keep doing that. So I think as a teenager to have kind of those three mindsets of, it's going to happen. It's okay that it hurts, and just to be sympathetic to the people that come after us. And I also think too, there's two questions that I have people start paying attention to. The first is to ask the question yourself, and even to, trusted parents and adults around you. What are you passionate about? What really gets you rolling? What could you talk about for the next, 5 days? And it could be really anything. It doesn't have to be this certain type of thing. It can be anything that you're really passionate about. What is that? Can you name it? Can you kind of pinpoint it? And the second thing is, what do you so desperately want to change in the world? I always say, what annoys you most about the world? What do you wish more than anything you could change? And I start to pay attention to those two questions. And again, not that you're going to figure it out overnight, but if you start kind of walking down that path as a parent, you start kind of guiding them down that path, or, friends see you kind of walk down that path and start to see how that morphs and changes and really kind of where it leads you. That's really where I start to pay attention to, okay, how can I be a leader, where I'm really passionate about, and where I wish I could, what are the things I wish I could most change in the world? And that will help us begin to understand how we can be a better leader and how we can figure out what our why is in this world.
So you offered us a couple of questions there to ask ourselves, to really internalize, what are we passionate about? And then the second one, which really strikes me as an interesting question here, what are you desperately, and I put the emphasis on desperately, because this is more than just a casual inconvenience. This is, what do I want to see changed in the world? What do I see that needs to change? What do I desperately want to change? And as I asked myself that question, leadership was really what I saw lacking. Not just leadership amongst young people or millennials, but leadership around the world, leadership at any age. And so you ask yourself these questions, and you come to this understanding, you come to this desire that you want to change, and then that starts to go down the path of your why. And I want to get into this conversation of the why, but before we do, I want to go back and ask you one step deeper on the conversation we were just having about giving yourself permission to lead. And the reason I want to ask you this is because the listeners of this podcast are leaders. We believe what you're saying, we understand what you're saying, and we live these leadership principles, but we work around people who don't necessarily believe this, or we have children that haven't come to the position or point in their life where they believe this. And so while I believe that you have to have this individual passion and desire to be a leader, you have to give yourself permission individually. What I want to ask you about is, how can we help those who haven't reached the point of giving themselves individual permission? How do we help those who don't know that they should be a leader or don't know that they need to be a leader?
One of the biggest things, again, which is what, my parents do, and I always urge people to do in their own lives, is, again, have these conversations. So, you can't want something more for someone than they want it for themselves. So it's really just saying like, let's have some conversation. Let's chat about this on a regular basis. If they bring up a situation, let's kind of dive into maybe how they can step up and just continue to have that conversation. But ultimately, I think even what's better than that is to live it out in your own life. So, we can talk about it all day long. But I know, I'm sure you know with your daughters, when they see you do something, it's a bigger example than when they hear you say something. So
absolutely,
it's really seeing you on a consistent basis. And it's not being perfect, right? It's actually better when you fail and you fall and you can have those conversations about, hey, I messed up and this is how I was a leader in that. Right. I am not perfect. I do fail in certain situations, and let's talk about that, because that shows the people around you that, okay, to be a leader does not mean to be perfect. It just means to walk this path, to be able to fail in a big way and get up and be okay with that and give yourself permission to keep going. So I think that's the biggest thing, is have those conversations, but again, live it out in your everyday life and be okay with failing in front of other people and having the conversation, about what that looks like, because that's a big example for them, because that's the fear, right? They feel like they have to be perfect. They feel like they really can't do it. They're going to mess up. But when you relinquish those fears, when you help them overcome the obstacles in their way, they're like, okay, like maybe I can do this. Maybe I'm not going to do it right away, but at least I know somewhere that I can start this journey. And then I see somebody walking ahead of me that's doing it. And now I feel like I have more confidence to be able to walk down that path.
Give them opportunities to learn and experience, to fail and to grow. I couldn't agree with you more. And one of the thoughts that came to my mind as you were talking about that is, what we put in, we often put out. You've heard the computer term GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, or good stuff in, good stuff out. And I think that applies to leadership as well. So if you're putting the leadership traits and qualities into a person, or if they take the initiative and put those leadership qualities and traits into themselves, you're going to start to see that coming out. And the more you can put in, the more you can get out. And so I love this conversation, but we do need to skip on to the next topic, because I think it's absolutely fascinating to talk about your why. And you mentioned something earlier. You said, often we know that we were made for something more. And I really believe this. I think that everybody out there has this internal desire, drive to be something more. Now, some of us have pushed it down to the point of not acting on it or not cultivating it and not growing it. And typically those aren't listeners of this podcast. Listeners of this episode are those who are trying to cultivate that and grow it. So let's talk about how you can find your why, your true calling.
I know when people hear that, and when I started to kind of explore this, it's an intimidating idea. So people feel like, oh my gosh, like tomorrow I have to like figure it out. Like, like it's like when you're 18 and they tell you have to figure out your life plan and like, what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And you're like, I'm only 18. Like
at a weekend workshop, right?
Yeah, right. And it's terrifying. So I guess to kind of a precursor to this is, again, as with anything in this life, as with leadership, it's not an overnight thing. It's not like tomorrow you're going to be able to greatly articulate to everybody what your why is. It's the journey of figuring it out and starting to be able to articulate it and write it down. So again, don't be intimidated by this idea that you have to have this like long paragraph, beautifully written thing, to tell everyone. It's just starting to explore it. And it really starts again with those two questions, like, what are you passionate about? And what do you desperately want to change in the world? And to start to kind of walk down those paths and explore, how can I start exploring this more? What can I be involved in? Who can I help? What mentors and coaches can I have to start to be able to explore this a little bit more? And you'll start to understand, because the why is just really a deeper question. So why do you do what you do? Why do you really want to be involved in this? Why do you really want to help? Why do you really want to change this in the world? Why are you really passionate about that? It's that deeper question, because it's so easy in this life to just say like, oh, I'm passionate about, gardening, or I'm passionate about ending world hunger or politics or something like that. And that's great. Fabulous. But why are you passionate about that? What do you so desperately want to see changed in that? What impact do you see that passion having on the world or your community or your school or the country? So it's just this deeper question of, hey, that's great that you're passionate about that. Hey, that's great that you want to change it. So tell me why. What is it within you that, is charging you to do that? And it's a little bit different, when you're younger. helping your daughters figure this out, helping teenagers figure it out because they don't have a ton of experience. But I love doing this with adults and with the businesses, the people that I coach and where I speak. I love asking this question because, so many of them have walked, 15, 20, 30 years down a job path or a career path. And I love asking them, so wait, why do you do what you do? And they have to think for a moment because we get kind of caught in the humdrum of the everyday kind of busyness. And when you have them sit back and say, why did you really get into this in the first place? Who was it that you wanted to change? Who was it that you wanted to impact? And it really starts to re-energize the work that they do. They get re-excited about, going to work every day because they're like, okay, there's a bigger reason why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this paperwork, just to do paperwork. I'm doing it because there's an end person, there's an end goal, there's an end impact in mind. And that's what makes it really more powerful.
And so as we think about the listeners right now, and they're listening to what you're saying, and they're trying to figure out how we can do this ourselves. And so when you talk about asking the question, what are you passionate about, or what interests you, or what do you desperately want to change in the world? And I think what you're saying is when you first start this exploration, you're really at a surface level. You're not getting deep enough to understand your true why. When you ask me, Jake, why do you go to work every day? My answer is, so I can make money and pay for my family. But what you're saying is we need to go deeper than that. We need to go a few levels and we need to keep asking why on the why. So the next question is, okay, Jake, I understand you go to work so you can make money. Why do you want to make money? Well, I need to make money so I can protect my family or take care of my family or pay my mortgage or whatever it may be. Okay, let's go another step deeper. Why is it important to you to protect your family and protect your pay your mortgage or whatever, and keep going down that path? And I think all of our listeners can do that themselves. Now, I think it helps to have a facilitator. It helps to have a coach or somebody that can walk you down this path. But if you're just going down this path on your own, go deep, really be vulnerable. Ask yourself this question at the core, why something is important to you. Now, I want to ask you, Annie, we've got this, you've talked just for a minute now about understanding our why. I want to ask you, why is it important to know our why?
Because it drives us when we have the critics. It drives us when we've fallen and failed in a big way. It drives us when we feel like I'm going down this path, but it doesn't seem like anything changes. It's the heart, it's the drive, it's the ultimate reminder of why you did this in the first place. Because again, to go back, no matter what you do, you always get caught in the everyday, the humdrum, what has to get done, the to-do list. And that makes sense. To do anything, you have to get things done. You have to accomplish things, but it can get overwhelming. It can get tiring. It can feel like I don't feel like I'm making an impact. So this to me is the reminder of every day, are you fulfilling your why? And maybe that looks like, have I helped one person today? Right. So we don't need to get caught up in, a lot of us who, everyone who's listening, who's passionate, who is the leader, we normally have this big idea. We want to change the world in whatever way, whatever facet we want to. We want to impact people, and that's amazing. But it can get overwhelming to think, okay, am I impacting, the tens of thousands of people I want to impact? And you may not see that till the end of your life. So I always ask the question, am I helping one person? Did I impact one person today? And that could be as simple as I made eye contact with them and I said, hey, how are you doing? Let's sit down and have a conversation. How are you? What's going on in your life? Smiling at someone, sending a nice email to someone, sending a handwritten note. That could be a way that you impact somebody in your everyday life. So it's the reminder, it's the drive of, am I doing the job I set out to do? Am I impacting the people I want to impact? And am I making the difference? And a big way to do this, or a big way to help you kind of remind yourself of this, is I tell people in my book, I have people write this down, and I always say, write it on a piece of paper, put it on your phone, put it as the background on your computer, and put it everywhere you can, whether that's in your locker, in your bathroom, on your bedside table, in your car, on your computer or your phone, anywhere and everywhere you can put it, to constantly remind you of why you do what you do. So it's like, say you bought a new car, Jake, and you bought a Toyota. And then all of a sudden, have you ever had this happen? You see Toyotas
everywhere.
You're like, where did all these Toyotas come from? How did I not see them? So it's the reticular activator in our brain. So when you start to see your why on a regular basis, even if it's not fully articulated, even if it's one sentence of why you do what you do or why you want to be a leader, you're seeing it, you will start to see opportunities to live out that why, to be a leader on a regular basis that you may never have seen before. So the more you start to ingrain in yourself, and like in the computer, you're training your brain to say, this is my why, this is why I do what I do, this is why I'm a leader, you will start to see opportunities and ways to do that in your everyday life on a big scale and on a small scale.
And you used a giant word that we don't use very often on the podcast, a reticular what?
Yeah, it's reticular activator. So it's this thing in the brain, like I said with the Toyotas, where as soon as you buy a car, or maybe you buy a game, or you do something, you start to notice it everywhere. It's this really cool thing in our brain. So the same thing is when we want to do something positive, when we start to see it on a regular basis, we start to get it ingrained in our brain, we start to pay attention to that more than we would before. Because your brain this is kind of the nerdy side of things, but your brain is trying to conserve calories, okay? So say you go into a big ballroom and you will always notice, say it's full of, 200 chairs, but you will always notice the exit signs, but you will never notice how many chairs are in the room because it's conserving calories. It's trying to figure out what information do I really need to know on a regular basis in this room to help me survive and help me save, my brain calories. So the more that it's starting to you're training your brain to pay attention to these important things, the more it will say, okay, I know I need to start paying attention to this, this, and this. And you'll start to see things you never saw before. So this is kind of the nerdy side of things, but really just the simple part of it is start to put it in front of your brain, in front of your eyes on a regular basis, because it'll start to train your brain to look for opportunities to live it out.
And I think this takes our conversation full circle back to how we started with leadership, and as parents, as employers, as we work around those who may not have this internal drive and desire to be a leader, we can help them by activating their reticular activator and helping them by seeing leadership all around. And the more they start to recognize it, notice it, the more they're going to see, the more it's going to reinforce, and the more it's going to be driven into their lives. And we could do the same thing if we find ourselves getting a little bit demotivated, having a little bit of a struggle, having a bad day. We can re-energize ourselves and re-engage by, what did we call it? Activating our reticular activator. And we'll see it everywhere, and that will help drive us and help us do more. So Annie, this is a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Before we let you go, there's a section of the podcast that I absolutely love. It's called Learning from Leaders. It's where we mix a little personal with this business conversation that we've had and find out a little bit more about you and what you're interested in. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. Our first question then is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table.
I would say the one I'm reading now that I really enjoy is called The One Thing. It's by
Keller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fabulous book.
It is absolutely a terrific book. And if you've read it before, read it again. If you haven't read it, I don't know what you're waiting for. Pick it up, read it. It is terrific. How about your leadership superpower?
I would say connecting with people on a deeper level, really getting to know them more than just surface. I have a deep desire to really get to know somebody beyond what you just tell me. So I love really sitting down in an intimate way, whether it's a small group or just one-on-one, and really getting to know, what drives you, what are you excited about, and it just lights me up.
How about a leadership mantra, motivational quote, or philosophy that you live by?
So this is the quote that started it all for me, and I always talk about it when I speak to groups, is "Be the change you wish to see in the world" by Mahatma Gandhi. Because for me, it switched the conversation, because before I always would get frustrated or irritated by what was going on in the world, feeling like I had no ability to change it. And I heard that quote, and it was like that light bulb moment. Like I was kind of hit over the head by a 2x4, and I realized I had to be the change in order to see it happen. So until I was going to live it out in my own life and have it transform my life, I couldn't possibly expect it to transform the world. So that's been what has driven me in this leadership journey.
And you can be that little pebble that starts the avalanche of leadership development. I mean, your little movement, your little change can start a chain reaction that can change the world. I love that quote. I love that philosophy. And thank you for sharing it. Our last question then in this section is the book that you most often gift, the one that you give away the most often.
I would say it's not a specific book, it's a specific author. Anything by Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown. She has at least 5 books that I regularly tell people to go read. She is a great writer. She's a teacher and educator. She's got a great TED Talk. But any of her books, her newest one is Braving the Wilderness, and it's amazing. She just really talks about a lot of internal things that we go through and think about, and really how to transform kind of our confidence and what we believe about ourselves. And they're awesome. So anything by her, I highly recommend.
And leadership and growth, development and success, these are all internal traits. These are all things that start first in your mind, they start first in your heart, and then they exit and go out to the world. And so anything that you're reading, studying, or listening to that is helping you to become a better person internally will help change the world. It'll be that change that you wish to see the most. Annie, thank you for your time today. Before we let you go, how can we find out more about you? What's this Young Women in Leadership or Young Women of Influence conference, and how can we connect?
Yeah, Jake, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome to chat about this. So a couple things, you can find the book on Amazon, the newest one, Leadership Built on Why. Also find me on my website, Anni Keffer, ANNIKEFFER.com. And that's all my social media handles as well. And the Young Women of Influence conference is one of my favorite things on the planet. Started in 2013. In Atlanta. It's a one-day conference for women in college and in their 20s and 30s to come and talk about leadership and influence, to kind of connect with like-minded women about what this journey looks like. And it's an amazing conference. So we do them all around the country. We have one for high school girls now. And it's just been an awesome journey just to see these women come together, to be supported, to kind of have those light bulb moments, and to really get re-energized to go back and do what's needed to be done.
And we're going to link all of that up on the show notes for this episode, because what you're doing is amazing and important. It's so vital that we help individuals reach their full potential, to identify within themselves what their why is, and to really go after it. Because the more of us that are going after our why, the more of us that are focusing on what it is that we truly feel called to do, the more this world will change for the better. And so, Annie, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Jake. I had a blast.
All right, my friends, you have your marching orders, right? We need to go out. We need to discover what our why is. It's so important that we know who we are and what we want to do in the leadership arena, and then to go out there and lead. And the way that we can do that is by giving ourselves permission to be leaders. And that doesn't mean that we have to have a formal leadership title. It can mean that we just want to take accountability and responsibility for a project or something in our lives. As Annie talked about, we need to ask ourselves that question. What is it that we desperately want to see changed in the world? That's how we can know what we're passionate about, what our why is. And then once we have that why, let's cultivate it, let's develop it, and let's go out there and be the change that we want to see in the world. I loved, as we stumbled over that word a little bit, the reticular activator. I love that word and I love that concept. And that is, when you start to focus on something, you see more of it. When you focus on the good, the clean, the pure, the powerful, and the positive, that's a nod to Zig Ziglar, by the way. But when you focus on that, you're going to see more of it, and it's going to reinforce it within your life. When you focus on the negative, when you focus on the yuck that's going on out there, well, guess what? You're going to see more of. And so activate your reticular activator, be a leader, give yourself permission to go out there and do it. Of course, everything that we talked about, including how to connect with Annie, is on the show notes for this episode, jakeacarlson.com/ML66 for Modern Leadership 66. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. Find your why and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.